So welcome. I was never sure when we create a new program who's going to come out, but this is it's very nice to see you all. We got a couple of people who are here because of Dr. Hernandez. Could you raise your hands? Yeah. How are you related to the council?
We both serve on the board.
You both serve on the board. Okay. Well, thank you.
The chair.
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming. Let me just explain what's going to happen in the next little while, and then we'll do it, like the classic way, the classic format of a sermon. You tell them what you're going to say, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you said. So first we're going to have this wonderful panel, wonderful because we have two really distinguished guests. And those of you who don't know me don't know that I don't use those kinds of adjectives lightly. These are both, I put this together with the help of Dr. Hernandez. These are people I hadn't met until this week. And besides that they agreed to come, I'm very impressed by who they are and what they've done. And I expect that it will factor into what they share with us this evening. Then we're going to have some refreshments. And then we'll do Havdalah, which will lead into our Selichot Service, which you all have a copy of the booklet. And you can see it's not a very long booklet, and we're not doing every word that's in it, just in case. And just in case you got a babysitter at home, we should be at the door a little after 9, I think, depending on how long we take it to cookies and cake. Okay, so the evening, we're opening the evening with a topic that's extraordinarily germane to the High Holy Days, just as Selichot itself is actually midway into rolling out the High Holy Days. We actually begin thinking about the High Holy Days when the month of Elul begins, and we're actually at the end of the month, toward the end of the month of Elul. And so Selichot is always the last Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, unless Rosh Hashanah falls, I want to say, I don't remember for sure, if it falls on Sunday or Monday, then you do it the Saturday before that. I forget that exact rule. I haven't encountered that in a long time. But the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah is Selichot, and it's typical to do some version of what we're doing, some kind of a discussion or a film or a trigger that leads to discussion about topics having to do with the High Holy Days, then the service, and then you go home. Now, one of the things that we're doing in the service, for which we all owe Jeff a great debt of gratitude, is we're going to be at a certain point in the service, and you won't see it in the booklet, I'm just going to arbitrarily call it at some point. We're going to open up the Ark, we're going to take out the Torah scrolls, and we're going to remove the covers that serve us 10 and a half months a year or some such, and we have white covers that we're going to put on them as a symbol of the High Holy Days. And I'm going to call upon you to help do that. I ain't doing no lifting, so you got to help do that. We'll open up the Ark, we'll take out all 3 Torahs simultaneously. I'll ask one of you to hold the Torah, another you to change it and so forth, and I'll need 2 of you to open the Ark. So I got 8 people that I need to work for us. Okay, so I think that's it. Unless there's any question, was that pretty clear? Again, thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see you. So to my immediate left is Reverend Leslie Takahashi, who, when I asked her to write a bio, I caught her in the middle of a class. So she gave me a very modest bio, but her bio is much more extensive than what she gave me. She's the lead minister at Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church, president of the UU Ministers Association, and long involved in interfaith work in Contra Costa and the Bay Area. Mother of 2 and a new grandmother. Mazel tov. But it's your second, you said, right? Yes. It's your second, okay. But what she didn't put in this, and what she told me when we met, I believe it was yesterday morning, is that she's got a book coming out. And you can tell from the title that the topic of it is germane to our discussion here. It's Truth, Trauma, Transformation, and it's due out in February. So I hope that she and I keep in touch, and I hope she and I maybe we can do something to help publicize the book, have her come in and give a talk. And she gave me a much longer bio, and I'm going to cut that down in doing my best to not fumfer through it. Dr. Karen Hernandez, a proud Chicana and theologian with 19 years of multi-religious peace-building experience in the U.S. and internationally. She recently earned her end-of-life doula certification. That's kind of an up-and-coming thing. You're the 3rd person within a year whom I met who does this. Fourth, I think. from the University of Vermont Larner School of Medicine. She also has a Doctor of Ministry from Claremont School of Theology, attended Boston University School of Theology. She got a Master of Sacred Theology in 2012. She went to Andover Newton, and she got another master's degree, and she got a BA in Peace and Justice Studies from Wellesley College. And what impressed me in particular was that while she was in Boston at different institutions, she made sure she could study 3 times with Elie Wiesel, who's obviously one of the iconic Jewish characters, individuals, of the 20th century. A pretty good writer, as you know, a really good midrashist, a great literary analyst, and a very good teacher. So I asked both of them to come and join me to talk about how they see from the perspective, from the lens of their religious tradition, the meaning of the word forgiveness. We're each going to present, and then I think we'll see if we have any dialogue among the 3 of us, and then we'll see if you have any questions. About questions, do not think that the question you have in your mind is dumb. Do not think that, okay? Whatever you have to ask, good evening, welcome. Whatever you have to ask, feel free to ask. And this meeting is for your sake, and maybe we can flesh this topic out as fully as we can, helped along by whatever you might have to ask us. Okay? Are we good? Okay, all right. Bakasha, please.
Thank you. I'm going to set my, can you hear me? Yes. I'm going to set my timer so I don't talk too long. All right, thank you so much, Rabbi Field. It's really wonderful to be here. We had lunch the other day, so my first time meeting him, and just such a wonderful conversation. And
yeah, we did.
Yes, and Reverend Takahashi, happy to be here with you as well. So I am a United Methodist. I was born Catholic, and had to find something a long time ago when our daughter was born, my former husband and I, where we felt comfortable, and that was the United Methodist Church. Now I'm still United Methodist, but I'm very, if you will, Buddhist-leaning, and have done a lot of work around the world that has really opened up my my spirituality in a way that I never expected. I've hung out with Hindus in India, and Bedouins in Jerusalem, and so I've just had these phenomenal experiences that have also shaped my degree work, have shaped the work that I do. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit, if you will, about what Christians believe in Christianity, but I'm also going to be talking about my experiences and...
we have somebody at the door. Could somebody let them in, please?
And,
excuse me, sorry.
That's okay. My experiences and what I've learned along the way about forgiveness.
Oh, okay.
So great. So if you're familiar with Christianity, much of what Jesus preached was forgiveness, acceptance, tolerance, love. We have turn the other cheek. We have also the Golden Rule, which the Golden Rule is actually present in every sacred text, pretty much even indigenous texts around the planet. And so, the Golden Rule, is treat others as you would want them to treat you. And that is a form, if you will, of forgiveness. And so, if we're looking at forgiveness within that Christian context, turn the other cheek, it's much easier said than done. And we all know this. Forgiveness is it's a personal choice, it's a collective choice, it's a countrywide choice, it's a world choice, and everybody is on very different levels of what forgiveness is and looks like and how it's practiced. So I did my Doctor of Ministry on, I designed a restorative justice component to interfaith peace building. And what that is if you're familiar with restorative justice, it's looking at restorative processes such as forgiveness, reconciliation, rehabilitation, and what does that look like in an interfaith context, in interfaith peace building. And I did that for an organization called United Religions Initiative, which is the largest grassroots peace building organization in the world. And so I developed a toolkit, and I featured several case studies in there and did a lot of research on what does forgiveness and reconciliation and restorative practices look like in Sikhism? What does it look like in Buddhism? What does it look like in Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism? I did a partial chapter on the epigenetics of trauma and what that looks like as well.
What does epigenetics mean?
Yes. So basically that is the study of how trauma is passed down through your DNA. And they've done a lot of interesting studies, especially on descendants of the Holocaust, and how that trauma has literally been passed down. And it was really fascinating for me as a peace builder who's worked around the world, how this idea of forgiveness and reconciliation is also bound in trauma and existing trauma and narratives, and how all of these things are very intertwined and are very difficult because of, again, all of the aggression and the conflict and violence and things that people have suffered. There, again, kind of as I see it, there are many facets of forgiveness. You have forgiving a family member. You have forgiveness in your community if somebody has committed a crime. You have forgiveness in your state if somebody has committed a major crime such as murder, and then your country, and then the world. So a great example of forgiveness, say, if you will, in the United States. Right after 9/11, what did we do? Did we seek forgiveness at all? No. We went straight to aggression, to war, invasion. Out of that, though, came a movement that I became very familiar with called 9/11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. And all of those families lost somebody either on the plane or on the ground, in one of the buildings. And all of those family members and friends of that organization to this day are still calling for peaceful resolution. They're calling for Guantanamo to close because there are still people being held in Guantanamo. So that notion of forgiveness they're a very small, fraction, if you will, of the rest of the country. Because what did we hear President Bush say that night? Retaliation. He used the word crusade, retribution. All of these words that completely and totally negate any type of understanding of what forgiveness might look like in that context, which again is obviously not easy. We had just lost thousands of people in something that nobody was ever prepared for and could be prepared for. So that's just a general sense of what forgiveness might look like collectively. I'm just going to look at my notes. As I was doing my doctorate, I also came across the story of, and this is very, if you will, lived forgiveness. So in my opinion, as a Christian, I see different ways of practicing Christianity. We all know there are evangelical Christians, there are, Protestant Christians, etc. And then we have all the, if you will, subgroups such as the Amish. And so when I was doing my doctorate, I looked very closely at the Amish school shooting in Pennsylvania. Carl Roberts walked into that school that day and he held all of those young women hostage, and then he ended up killing 5 of them, shooting 5 of them, and then he shot himself. What many people don't know is what happened afterwards. The leaders of that community immediately called for especially for the young men who were very angry, who wanted to go out and do something, to step back and remember their tradition, what they practice as Christians, as Amish. What does it look like? What does forgiveness look like? And one of the things that one of the leaders of the community said was, we didn't have to teach them forgiveness in that moment. We just had to remind them of our practice of lived forgiveness. This is how we are. This is who we are. Forgiveness is a way of being for the Amish. So much so that evening, the Amish community was sending Carl Roberts' widow meals. So much so that even more than that, the next morning, and the reason I know this was actually somebody from the UUSC, which is the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, is that right? Yes. Actually was part of the trauma response team, and she was sitting at the table having coffee with several Amish family members who had lost their daughters the day before, and Carl Roberts' widow. That, for me was incredible to learn and to understand, and also to not be able to understand that, because I don't think many people would be able to do that. Even more, there were more Amish at Carl Roberts' funeral than anybody else. Family members, nobody showed up. Community members, old friends, nobody showed up. There were more Amish at the funeral. So that is another form, if you will, of forgiveness that is really hard to fathom. But at the same time, is something that I think that we're all capable of as human beings. And it's about learning differently, because when we are children, what do we learn? Say sorry to, Joey because he took your toy. But the reality is that we are taught from a very young age that retribution and revenge is acceptable, because look, if you will, at our justice system. It is retaliatory. It is revengeful. It is retributive. It is not in any way whatsoever forgiving or restorative. There are restorative processes within prisons. I actually tutored women in prison who are getting their GEDs. And so there's a lot of things happening in prison. There's dance programs, art programs. There's a great program in Arizona where they work with horses, wild horses. The reality is, though, is that for the most part, our justice system is retributive, and that's just normal for us. We don't really question that. And I know that there's a lawyer in the room, and she could probably talk all about that. So, so I have a couple more minutes. So in regard to my personal experiences with forgiveness, my daughter was a junior in high school at Sudbury Lincoln High School, or Lincoln-Sudbury High School in Massachusetts, where we lived. And one day, James Odgren, who was a junior, walked into the school with a knife, wanting to kill somebody. And unfortunately, he found James Allenson in the bathroom. And he initiated an intentional altercation with James, who was a freshman, and he stabbed James in the bathroom. And James stumbled out and died in the hallway of the school. It was horrible, obviously, and everybody says this doesn't happen in our community, but the reality is that it does. And so I initiated a restorative justice process, because the reality is that both of those parents that day, James Odgren's family and James' family, they both lost a son that day. As hard as that is to admit, they both lost a child that day in very different ways. I went to my church, United Methodist Church, seeking church members who would go to John Odgren's house with me. Nobody would go with me. And I just remember thinking, but isn't this who we are? Isn't this what Christianity is supposed to be? Literally nobody would go with me. And so I found my daughter's friend's mom went with me, and we sat with the Odgrens, and they had threats, phone calls, people driving by their house, breaking their windows. James Allenson's family, the one who was killed, I also reached out to his family. They literally left that afternoon after James was killed and never came back and didn't want to talk to anybody. So that type of violence is really, really difficult, obviously, to forgive. And at the same time, what's worse? To hold in all of that anger and that hate forever, or to release it? And I'll just close with, I was in Liberia and Zimbabwe in January and February when I just was working with Religions for Peace International, and we did a forgiveness project. It was on the science of forgiveness. And the Templeton World Charity Foundation does a lot of work on the psychology of forgiveness, the physiological, mental, emotional, psychological benefits of forgiveness. And so we worked with the Templeton World Charity Foundation to create a toolkit on what the science of forgiveness looks like multi-religiously. And I was one of the trainers, and we got to go to Zimbabwe and to Liberia, and my earrings are from Zimbabwe. And what was fascinating was, Liberia is 20 years post-Civil War. There was a warlord in the room who had become a pastor. And every single one of them in post-Civil War Liberia, 20 years later, it was a new government in place for 2 weeks when we were there. Zimbabwe has had a history of conflict and violence for many, many years. When I asked the question, if somebody came and harmed your family tomorrow, which many of them did lose family members in all the conflict and violence, would you turn the other cheek? Would you seek forgiveness? And every single one of them shook their head and said no. So this is the world. This is why we continue to have conflict. We continue to struggle with the idea of forgiveness, because the trauma is deep, the memories are deep, the narratives are deep, and it's I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but it's just really, really hard to to really offer true forgiveness. Again, on the same token, though, if we don't learn how to be a different way, kind of like the Amish, if we don't learn how to live forgiveness, then we're just going to keep doing exactly what we keep doing. And I think I would rather choose the former, where we are able to forgive and we're able to live holistically and restoratively.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you and good evening. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you for inviting me into this beautiful sanctuary place of worship, and I'm really grateful to be here. And it's an honor to be part of this program and to also follow Reverend Dr. Hernandez in your work. Yeah, thank you. But it's great to have you. Yeah. A couple years ago, I wrote this about forgiveness. To forgive another is to see into the heart of a person and to recreate the ties that hold you one to another. To forgive oneself is to see into one's own heart with a wider understanding and to forge a new bond. Forgiveness travels beyond what has been down the path of the possible. While what is possible may never come to be, the invitation of the path is its own journey. Forgiveness stretches the heart and reminds the soul of its link with the divine, where that which we cannot comprehend lives. So I want to take a moment and just tell you just a few words, just take a minute of my time to talk a little bit about my tradition, because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with it. And it helps people to know kind of where we are coming from in that sense. So I am part of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, and while it is sometimes confused with cults and sects of other names that begin with U, it is actually the merged tradition, two merged traditions, the Unitarian tradition and the Universalist tradition, both of which have centuries of experience both within these shores and also throughout the world. And so it's an important tradition that I like to take a moment to educate people with. Both of these traditions were named as heresies, and the word heresy by the Christian tradition. And we, of course, come from Jewish and Christian roots, so we consider ourselves part of the broader family in that sense. But the Unitarian heresy, the word heresy, by the way, means to question at its root, at its etymological root, right? So we are questioners, and that is very true of our folks, believe me. When you serve as the minister, you realize that, right? Everyone has at least 100 questions about everything all the time in my tradition. But the Unitarian tradition was the tradition that said that the divine is one, that there was not biblical support, scriptural support for the doctrine of the Trinity. So actually, some of my Jewish friends like to say, well, you're actually closer to us than the others. So anyway, but that was the Unitarian history, and we are now in the process of redefining our tradition and giving new words to it. So we adopted a new statement of vow of faith last June, actually. It's very new. And what we said was we will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. And this is important because of the topic tonight. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. So that's now in our statement of faith as of last June. The Universalist heresy was the idea that a loving God would not condemn some to eternal damnation, but that all were would eventually be saved, and eventually that became that all were born blessed. So there didn't need to be a blessing, that people came already with inherent worth and dignity. And that's been an important part of our tradition as well. And our newest statement on that is to say, we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. And we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. Both of those sides of the house, those traditions, speak to this topic tonight of forgiveness at its root, because our goal is to honor one another. And that means in the times when we do well by each other and the times when we don't. And that is the challenge, of course, which is, of course, not to say that we can do that well. About 10 years ago, our congregation in Knoxville, Tennessee, was the site of a church shooting. We had an invasion in the congregation. And Chris Bice, my colleague there, who is the minister there and remains the minister there, said that I think the enduring feeling that I carry from that experience is that there's a love bigger than our differences. Because we had every faith and every tradition come together after what happened to us. I'm a pretty liberal minister, but I got one of the biggest hugs of my life from one of my most conservative minister friends in the community after that event. And so he speaks to the fact that sometimes we can overcome our differences in these times. So one of the things that has been probably the hallmark of our tradition in the last 130 years or so is that we have embraced the ability to hold the principles of our faith next to the innovations of the scientific community, right? So that's a very important part of what we are and what we do. And so what I want to say, and this is very much in concert with what Dr. Hernandez said, which is the science of understanding what happens to us as human beings when we undergo the kind of traumatic incidents that sometimes are the hardest for us to find the grounds of forgiveness for, is understood now at a level that it was never understood before. There's just been incredible advances in that field. And as a result, I think it actually informs us as people of faith, and in terms of how we hold one another. We have our own traditions as to how we would address a subject like forgiveness, and I look forward very much to hearing the rabbis share in a few minutes. But I think just the way that we shape our institutions around forgiveness, I think, is important. And in this world in which, coming out of a global pandemic, coming out of a very divided world and nation, almost everybody at some level now, in addition to the people who carry it epigenetically through our inheritance, right, the inherited trauma, which I share as the daughter of a Japanese American who was incarcerated during World War II. So I think that almost everybody is touched by some level of traumatic experience now and understands that, or at least is affected by it. So I think this is such an important topic for us to look at together, and I think that's an important piece. And I think the idea of, a couple things I want to suggest are just some ideas about forgiveness. And the first is, in the spirit of what's happening tonight, the importance of just understanding forgiveness, because what the scientific studies have shown is that forgiving others produces a stronger psychological benefit for the one who forgives, actually, which I think all of us know. It doesn't make it easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's one of the things that we found, that it can, and that it's very important as something that we extend towards the other person. So what that means is that I think one of the things that we get caught in a lot is the need for this to be a mutual exchange, right, where both parties are in relationship. And I think what people have found through this new scientific discovery is that actually that's not necessarily required. That even if a person is able to, in their own mind, renegotiate their relationship with that person, another being, it still makes a difference in their spiritual and psychological and physical well-being, because the other thing that the science very clearly indicates is that our inability to forgive has strong physical impacts on our health, right? So that's another piece of that. And I say this a lot to people who lose somebody in their life that's important to them, with whom they have not had relational repair before that death. And what I will often say to them is that while they cannot have an actual relational repair in real time, they can continue to evolve that relationship in their understanding of it, and it will still allow them to explore forgiveness, because that's a really important piece, that relationship can continue. So I think the importance of, one of the things I think we are, in our tradition, we've looked a lot at is the importance of empathy versus sympathy. Empathy being that ability to, which is incredibly painful in the world in which we live, but to put ourselves into the experience of the other as much as we can, as opposed to sympathy, which is about expressing, a concern about the expression of the experience of the other, which is also important, but it's at a different level than the empathetic understanding. And I think that's something that is important as well. So to develop that courage and patience, but most importantly, and I think this is probably the step that is often most neglected, is self-forgiveness. And sometimes we skip that step because we don't, that's the hardest thing for people to do, is to forgive themselves, which can often lead us to magnify divisions around us. And that can be such an important piece to begin with, that forgiveness of ourselves, even if that forgiveness of ourselves is for our inability to forgive. I mean, and just to be real, that's often where we get stuck in that over time. So I will just say a couple more sentences, and then we'll turn it over. But I look forward if we can have some discussion afterward. But I do believe that the world, I'm going to talk about our country. Religion is on a rapid decline. Participation in organized religion is on a rapid decline in our nation. It was on a decline for a while. And it's about the last 15 years we've been seeing it. But what happened as a result of the shelter has been precipitous. And I do believe that our democracy will be worse off for not having more people trying to hold up the ideals of their values with ideals like forgiveness. And in order to do that, I believe, we as organized bodies of religion, or in our case, we call ourselves semi-organized. But I believe that we would be better off learning how to embrace these new principles of the science that's out there about trauma, about the importance of these psychological impacts of the world we live on, so that we could be more relevant, especially to those younger generations. And I think that's a really important challenge before us. So I'm going to close with these words of Mahatma Gandhi. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. If we practice an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, soon the whole world will be without sight.
Thank you. Could you, no, I got one here. Could you hand me that, no, the papers? You send me those papers, yeah, yeah. Thank you. So first of all, I thank both of you very much for what you had to say. You'd said something that just slipped out of my mind. So I'm just going to go through my notes. I want to remind you, as I said at the very beginning, why this is an appropriate discussion as we move into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah begins next Wednesday night. Yom Kippur is 2 Friday nights hence, falling on Shabbat. And the idea, I say the overarching conceit of these high holy days, beneath which lies a whole lot of ideas and practices, is that this is our annual dust-up, our annual gathering, where we confront very powerful, very difficult moral and spiritual issues that we may have neglected or not dealt with seriously enough over the course of the rest of the year, so that we use this time as best we can to be reflective, contemplative, but also social. In other words, at the end of Rosh Hashanah, when we've talked about tshuva, about repentance, about return, the idea that 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the day of, thank you, just checking, the day of atonement, is that we enter into that service with the Kol Nidre, and we're going to have a very lovely Kol Nidre here this year, a beautiful Kol Nidre. Having prepared ourselves for Kol Nidre by having, in that contemplative state of ours, and socially addressed people whom we've wronged. Now, in this sense, for the most part, the tradition doesn't think that we've all done really bad things, but we've irritated people. We have maybe done some really bad things, or sufficiently bad, that have alienated us from friends, from family members, from our community, from our world. And the job during that 10 days, the Seret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance, is that you go to the person whom you've wronged and you apologize. And I guess I'm going to kind of get into my talk from this, and as it comes up in my notes, I'll be able to self-edit. The idea is that you go to a person whom you've wronged and you apologize, and you say, I'd like you to forgive me. Now, that's really hard. It's hard to forgive, and it's really hard to ask for forgiveness, which could be why my whole lifetime of being wronged by people, little bits and things here and there, not one person had ever come up and asked me to forgive them. And I imagine we've had a similar experience. But this is the ideal of the tradition, to address one another. Joe, will you please forgive me? I know I yelled at you in public and it was humiliating, and I'm really sorry I did that. And then what Joe has to do is, Joe can do one of two things, one of two obvious things. Joe can say, well, he can do one of three things maybe. Joe can say, all right, no, you really humiliated me, and I lost my job on account of that, and my kids won't talk to me. Or Joe can say, yes, I forgive you for what you did. Or Joe can kind of strike a middle path and address his interlocutor by saying, I'm ready to forgive you, but you need to do this and this. Take out a full-page ad in the New York Times and publicly apologize to me. And maybe my wife will come back, and maybe I can get my job back. And I can say, well, an ad in the New York Times about $35,000 the last time I looked it up. Maybe a half a page in the local paper, whatever. But that you have to do some kind of restitution. You have to form some kind of restitution to effectuate it. Now, if Joe says no, go away, and you come back and say, look, it really bothers me. My conscience is really overwhelmed by this. Can you please forgive me? And Joe says, go away. And you come back a third time, and you ask Joe one more time, one final time, and he may have changed his mind. He may have softened. He may offer some kind of form of that you need to do some form of restitution. But if he says no, go away a third time, the tradition teaches genug. The Talmud isn't written in Yiddish, but enough. You don't have to go back to him again. I've even heard, though I've not, in reading up on this, I haven't seen it written, so I'm not sure I either made it up or somebody else made it up. But I'd heard that if Joe refuses a third time, it is, as it were, the sin passes over to him. But it's sufficient that you no longer have to go seek forgiveness from him. And then what you may have to do, as we talked about here, is if you are really consumed with the guilt over what you've done, you don't have to work that out yourself. You don't have to find a way to forgive yourself for what you did to Joe. Acts that you do that don't involve another person, the tradition teaches, Yom Kippur, and so it's understood between Bein Adam LeMakom, between you and God. My favorite example is, this example doesn't really work in a community where kashrut isn't taken very seriously, but let's pretend we do take the dietary laws seriously. And I'm your rabbi, and I'm well known for punctiliously observing the dietary laws. But every now and then I walk by downtown and there's this wonderful store that sells ribs, gorgeous ribs, really with great sauce. And twice a year, I can't resist. And I go in and I get a double rack because I can't do it. I can't do it more than twice a year. That's a sin against me and God. That's a sin against me and God. And if I'm generally repentant and I say, this year I'm not going to try, I won't go down that street. I won't go by a rib joint again. And God forgives you. And of course that presupposes a universe, and this still presents innumerable interpretations, but it presents a universe in which the human being, the person, can in some way communicate with God. And that's not for this evening. We can talk about this another time. Forgiveness, getting back to the beginning of this, is a gift to the offender. You don't have to forgive that person, and in doing so, you're giving that person a very big gift. Similarly, it's a message that we are prepared to let go of the resentment and anger caused by his or her behavior toward us. On the other hand, forgiveness is also a gift to the self. Getting back to where Joe won't let me forgive him, right? It's a gift to the self. And in that sense, and we've touched upon this already in certain ways in our discussion, in that sense, I want to present two different views of how the Jewish tradition thinks of forgiveness. There's a majority view, which is actually somewhat in conflict with what we've heard, but not totally in conflict, of course, but somewhat in conflict. And this is often held up as the kind of difference between the Jewish view and the Christian view on the matter of forgiveness. Let me just check here. Okay. Mechila, the word mechila, which I'm about to use in the text I'm about to read, is a kind of a softer form of forgiveness. The strong form of forgiveness is slicha. This is a quote from David Blumenthal, teaches at Emory University. Mechila is an expectation of the offended person, but is only if the sinner is actually repentant. Joseph Telushkin, who I guess he's in L.A., so you may know the name because he's a California person. Generally, forgiveness should be dependent on the offending party's repentance. And then Elliot Dorff, who's really one of my favorite, I guess to my mind, he's the most important Jewish ethicist in America. He teaches at the University of Judaism in L.A. If the offender never admits wrongdoing, then even if he or she has served a prison term, the very first step in return has not been achieved, and no forgiveness can be legitimately demanded of the victims. Although gross offenses should probably not be forgiven without sincere attempts to engage in the process of return, one might be prone to forgive more minor offenses without such a process, such as both a pragmatic way of getting on with one's life and possibly restoring a friendship, and also as an expression, a religious demand that we imitate God. God forgives, we forgive. Such free forgiveness, though, becomes harder to justify as the offense grows larger, and that's what I'm going to focus on this in a moment. Then God's righteousness seems to be the divine attribute we should emulate. So, the kind of issues that my partners here were talking about really are large, national, international issues that have very, very grave consequences. How many girls were killed in that Amish school? 5 kids murdered, and having the affected parties having to deal with that is really, it's a lot more powerful than the fact that Joe never returned my lawnmower, and I could, or he never paid me back the $100 I lent him. So there is, I want to say, a kind of a degree of sin to which one might have to consider forgiveness, I think I'm going to digress. I didn't set a timer, and I hope I'm not going over the time limit I set. There's a wonderful book by Simon Wiesenthal called The Sunflower, and in it he begins with a long story about when he was imprisoned in a work camp during the war. He wasn't in a death camp, and he's called to the bedside of a dying German soldier who participated in in a killing of a number of Jews. They burned a house down. He was part of a group of German soldiers who burned a house down where there were Jews living inside. And he's racked with guilt about this, and he's dying. And he asks Elie Wiesel for forgiveness. Now, that poses a whole lot of issues that we're not going to get into now, but that's an extreme issue I'm talking about in terms of forgiveness. Or the word isn't coming to my mind, but the work that South Africa did after the fall of apartheid to kind of reconcile the black truth and reconciliation, that's a very hard thing. For the most part, what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur ask us to do are much less serious kinds of offenses, although when it comes time for the Israelis and the Palestinians, I said we were going to talk about this tonight, we're not beyond this. When it comes time for the Israelis and Palestinians to sit down, may it be soon and in our day, but I'm doubtful, they're going to have some kind of reconciliation talks like this for them to be able to face one another. But having said those two things, there's an interesting quote, and I believe I have two quotes. I want to make sure I have the second one. Yes. So this is from a book called the Tosefta Baba Kama, which is it's a Jewish book, take my word for it. He who injures his fellow, even though the one who did the injury did not seek forgiveness from the injured party, the injured party nonetheless has to seek mercy for him, since it says, and it quotes from the book of Genesis, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, the king that he had some conflict with in the book of Genesis. And then there's an admonition to forgive in a prayer that you find in most traditional prayer books. So it's not in the Reconstructionist one, nor in the Reform one that we use. And you say, I hereby forgive, and this is what you say before you go to bed at night. I hereby forgive and absolve anyone who has angered or provoked me or sinned against me, physically or financially, or by failing to give me due respect or in any other matter relating to me, involuntarily or willingly, inadvertently or deliberately, whether in word or deed, let no one incur punishment because of me. This must have been written by a lawyer. But that's what you say before you go to bed. So there is an impulse in the Jewish tradition to forgive without being asked to forgive. And in thinking about this, I think I said that these last two quotes really represent a minority position. The majority position is well represented by the quote I gave you from Elliot Dorff, where you have, and that whole process that I described. The sinner has to ask for forgiveness. But there are times and places and occasions, I think, when the person hasn't asked to be forgiven, and maybe you want to go and ask. You say to the person, I'm ready to talk to you about forgiveness, but that's hard to do also. There are times and ways in which it might be well for one's own self to effectuate a kind of a forgiveness, whether you actually formally forgive that person, or as is in the form of this prayer, you get it out of your head. You get this baggage out of your head before you go to bed, and hopefully wake up without the baggage in your head remaining. So, I don't want to make any kind of, witty remarks about the ambiguity of the Jewish tradition, any major tradition. I mean, all you got to do is take a course in Western philosophy, and you'll know how philosophers disagree about just about everything. The Jewish tradition has its minority opinion and its majority opinion. But why I'm bringing this to you this evening is because I know from personal experience that people who have wronged me, and most of the time it's on the occasion of the $100 they didn't pay back, or the book they didn't return. But there have been one or two occasions where I think it's a healthy thing for you to try to effectuate a sense of forgiveness toward the other, even if that person hasn't come to you. But I think in keeping with the majority opinion in the Jewish tradition, in the case of relatively serious or serious offenses, or offenses that you really feel you talk to the other person about, forgiving without being asked to forgive is not the majority opinion of the Jewish tradition. So, thank you all very much. Thank you. Now, we said we're going to ask each other questions. Does anything come to mind? I don't know if anybody's on the stream, but if they are, we should have the mic. And if you are streaming, good evening. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov.
Trying to articulate what I want to say. So, essentially, what we've talked about is the concept of forgiveness within ourselves, that self-forgiveness, that outward forgiveness for somebody who, in our family or congregation who has wronged us, as well as kind of that wider context of where I work in my peace-building world, here in the community as well as internationally. I see. So my question is, first, I'll just quickly explain. So I've worked with women in India who were in the Gujarat riots. And if you're familiar with that, it was in the early 2000s. And these women it was a horrific act of communal violence that lasted for several days, and thousands of women were raped. In India, when this happens, you're shunned. So all of these women still, to this day, 20 years later, are living all together in a village because they've been shunned. One of them said to me, because we were talking about forgiveness, and one of them said to me, and then we were talking about self-forgiveness, and one woman said, which was a very valid question, why I can't forgive the person who's harmed me, who's wounded me, who's perpetrated this horrible act of violence on me, so why do I have to forgive myself? And my answer was, it's not even really about forgiving yourself, it's about allowing yourself, because their family members won't talk to them, nobody will talk to them. So they hate themselves. They despise themselves because society despises them. So as I explained this, one woman said, well, I'm not going to forgive myself because I didn't do anything to myself, which is very valid, right? So in our traditions, when I was trying to address this, and I couldn't answer her question. I could not answer her question. And we can do this too in a local setting, if you will. I have a friend, she is 40-something years old. She is still abused by her parents, verbally, and this is very common. Adults still abused by their parents, either if they're not living with them or they just go over and their parents are abusive, verbally, all of that. So it's very connected. These women in India who are shunned, who can't forgive themselves, and then people here who are dealing with family members. So myself as a Christian, I advocate, obviously, for self-forgiveness, for forgiveness of the one who has harmed you. At the same time, there's this impossible place I feel that we're all sitting in. So I don't have an answer to this question, but I just thought I'd put it out there for you to perhaps reflect on.
So you expect us to have an answer? Well, in my brief presentation, I didn't use two words which I had intended to, so it's a good time to bring it up. The first word is tzedek, the word meaning justice. You know the word tzedek. You probably, if you're familiar with the tradition, you know that word. Tzedakah is itself also means, it gets mistranslated as charity, and it also means justice. And there's a famous quote in the book of Deuteronomy, in the section called Shoftim, which talks about building judges. The Torah portion called Judges, where it talks about building a just community. And there's this line, Tzedek, Tzedek Tir Dov. And there, the duplication of the word is intended, and this is clear from biblical grammar and biblical linguistics, it's intended really to intensify it. Justice, justice, you shall pursue. Something just went in and out of my head, sorry. You shall pursue justice. But there's a midrash that says that Tzedek goes to God. God's about to create the world, and Tzedek goes to God and says, I should be the dominant quality in the world. And one angel says, if that happens, the world can't stand. And chesed, the other word I wanted to bring up, meaning kindness, then goes to God and says, I should be the dominant quality in the world. And another angel says something to the effect, if the world is created only in the attribute of kindness, without justice, the world in its own way will fall apart. There'll be no justice in things. Everybody will always be kind and when justice is required. So it comes to mind in your example, give me the opportunity to introduce 2 Hebrew words, what that woman needs and maybe to that extent, what that community is, just understand within its own framework, to be kind to itself. That's all I can say, really, a little bit of kindness, because they live in having an unresolved act of injustice performed upon them, and that ain't never going to change. So they have to be kind to each other. I mean, this isn't the time. I am interested in terms of the community that they've developed. I mean, are they mutually supportive? Do they help each other? Yeah. Yeah, totally. Do you have anything to add to that? No problem.
Yeah, I think the thing that occurs to me is, and this is very much on my mind because suddenly, within the last 24 hours, I've been asked by a family to perform a memorial. It's literally a mic drop, right? I've been asked to perform a memorial on Monday for a young 32-year-old who was murdered in Oakland earlier this week. And so it's very much on my mind right now, this issue. And so I think that I appreciate the 2 words, in the juxtaposition of them. And I also think that that perhaps our forgiveness isn't, just a toggle, to forgive or not forgive, but that there's a progression. And in anyone's life, I would never suggest less than a week after a violent, unexpected death of a young person that people should be ready for forgiveness who were right in that front line there. But I think to know that it's there in the realm of choices that they will be able to make down the road, I think is really important. And so I think it's that kind of well there. And that is actually one of the most, one of the things that has been discovered about traumatic experiences, that too often people don't have choice. They only have one path that's put before them. And so just offering people the ability to make their own choice sometimes in the short term is a really important piece. You hope that through doing that, then you move towards the ideal of the forgiveness.
I like that, the toggling back. That's kind of what I was trying to say also, that there are degrees of wrongs that are committed upon people, and I think the way in which the way to handle it is the interaction between your own self, your own psyche, your own spirit, and what you need, and the extent of the wrong that's been done to you. It's very hard to forgive somebody without that kind of restitution I talked about, if the wrong that's committed against you is really serious. So, any questions? Comments? Yeah. Well, assuming we got streamers, we got to have the mic. Larry, I thought you were coming forward to do the mic duty. Okay. So when you're done, hand it to. Go ahead, Sharon.
So, I guess my question is this on?
Yeah.
It's part question, part observation. And you're discussing these women in India who live together in this community now. If you settle the violence aside and they don't feel that they can forgive themselves because they were actually victims of the society or the people or whatever the circumstances were, they have done something rather unique. They've all come together. They've learned how to be a community and how to survive and how to progress through the world. And if it was difficult to come up with an answer for how to forgive, I think what Rabbi was saying was, it's part of a continuum. I think you all feel that or sense that. But these women have an amazing amount of self-worth and self-respect that they've shared and developed among themselves. And that has to be some kind of source of strength, if not just pride or they've survived. It might not be the greatest thing in the world, but I think that's a foundation upon which to build from. If they can't get to forgiveness, that's fine. But I think they're missing the point that look what you've done and look how you've been able to take the next step and breathe the next breath and go from one day to the next. Maybe that's the way to, yeah, eventually overcome, but start off. Thank you.
Other questions?
I think this is probably more of a comment than a question, but in my faith tradition, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and in my faith tradition, in our Book of Mormon, there's a sermon or a discourse on the concept of justice and mercy, and how we believe in a just God and we believe in a merciful God, and those two principles do often feel like they're in conflict. That you get different outcomes if you're looking for just straight justice versus somebody who's just going to extend mercy. And one of the ways I've been thinking about this lately is perhaps those two principles aren't quite as conflicting as they might seem. That in fact, perhaps the reason for justice, when we think about a just God, that it will be punished if we don't don't live our lives in a way that's not hurtful to other people. Perhaps that when we feel like that justice hangs over us, it motivates us to live our lives in a better way. In fact, it motivates us to be merciful to others. Once we've kind of come before God and felt like we've got His mercy in our lives, now the whole purpose of justice changes us to be merciful people so that we can extend mercy to others. So I guess that's a long way around to say, first off, you have to do your own work and really feel like I'm okay and it's good. Then I can extend that mercy to other people in a way. And so I think the whole point of justice is to create mercy. And I think the justice system in our country, if we could use that justice system to really extend mercy. I mean, there's this justice that hangs over you, so you want to push people to do the right. But once they've made a mistake, now it's time to help them to rehabilitate and extend mercy to them.
Anybody else?
There's one online.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Very true. And also, too, what's important is not only extending that mercy, but encouraging those who have caused harm to extend that mercy and forgiveness. Again, it's that self-forgiveness. I spoke to a woman when I was doing my doctorate who had just got out of prison after 35 years. She was 18. She grew up in a very rough neighborhood in the New York area, and the only way for survival in that neighborhood was fighting. And she got in a fight with a 17-year-old young woman on a street corner. And as she was telling me this story, she said that men were surrounding them, screaming at them, cheering them on, yelling, "Kill her, kill her, kill her." And she did. And 35 years later, she got out of jail and was learning, how to use an ATM card, how to cook, all of these things. The one thing, though, that she said that saved her was that she went through a restorative justice process with the family of the woman who she killed, the young woman who she killed. And that they communicate once a year, and that forgiveness from that family allowed her to also forgive herself and to show herself mercy and to show herself that kindness that she didn't feel for herself whatsoever, obviously, after what had happened. But and the other bigger part of that, though, is that the community was a part of that crime, and that is part of the problem too, is the kind of the collectiveness of the trauma that people experience. Usually is not just that one person committing whatever is happening. It's usually part of a collective issue. So, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. Marty Mart is online, and he says, how do we begin to forgive Israel for the atrocities when those atrocities continue?
I'm not going to answer that. No, I can't answer that because it's got the wrong framework, and to present the right framework, it's not appropriate now. So I'm sorry.
Do you want me to answer the question in a general sense of conflict? Or?
Sure. Okay.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah.
it was, how do we begin to forgive Israel for its atrocities when those atrocities continue?
So as Rabbi Phil said, you know, we don't want to necessarily address that specific case, but what I can say in the work that I've done around the world in conflict, this is why conflict continues, is the inability, the narratives, and the inability to forgive, the inability to offer that true understanding of what does it look like to not react in a retributive way and to move in an opposite way. And there are cases all around the world, Rwanda, Israel, Palestine, you know, Syria. We can go on and on in regard to what that looks like and how to address that violence that is still happening in many, many parts of the world. My answer to that is, and it's not to be flippant or to dismiss the importance of what this question is, because this question is important. It is to understand the context of the worldwide issue that we're facing in regard to conflict and violence, and our inability to solve it is really what it boils down to. And I don't know if you
No,
wanted
that's
to
fine.
add anything,
Do you
but
want to add anything to that?
I think.
I want to actually bring it a little closer to home. Again, not to address this specific question, though I understand it's in a question, it's in a lot of people's hearts. And that is that we have a ministry that we call Faith Without Walls, which is our ministry to our neighbors who are predominantly unhoused in our community. And one of those people that we have a long-term relationship with is a former gang member who grew up in Concord, not very far from here, right? So did a little bit of time and decided at age 24 to not participate in the gang anymore. And that is not okay in the norms of the gang. And so therefore cannot go outside of, lives on the streets of Walnut Creek, where they will never, probably ever be able to afford a place to live, like an actual apartment or room or anything. Lives in their car because they can't, they cannot go to Concord. They cannot go to Oakland where the same gangs are. They cannot go to Antioch. And so I bring that up to say that there is somehow, I think, within us a deep yearning as people of faith to figure out ways to overcome these deep divisions that are so difficult and that caused so much.
Yeah. So I'll say one other thing quickly, which is, I hope you know, I mean, those of you who were at services last night, I talked about Israel last night. You know that the conflict is very much on my mind. The way that question was posed requires a very, very, very long answer, which is not appropriate for the evening. And it's a question that I'd be more than happy to go into at another time at some length in a discussion, not to give a lecture. But the question is a very angry question also. But that aside, anything else? Yeah.
So I've been thinking all evening about, now I will put something out there up front. I am a retired military police officer. So I come at the world with a particular perspective. And I find the idea of forgiveness, absent justice, or maybe even more importantly, absent repentance, to be abhorrent. The idea that someone should be allowed to do something to somebody else, and then the somebody else, the victim, somehow has an obligation to forgive absent justice, and especially absent repentance. I've seen enough victims to know that is not human nature. I think people are inherently good. I think that if someone who commits an evil act, who damages another person, who steals, whatever it is, can come and honestly say, I did a terrible thing, I'm really, really sorry. I think forgiveness follows right after that, but it doesn't start. It's a response to repentance. And in the absence of repentance, it's a response to justice. So that's just my perspective.
And I'm going to give a really quick answer,
Sure.
and I think it really is to the point that you were talking about. So, but I will just say, ideally, yes, right? But here's the reality, right? I have certainly experienced people who are incapable of repentance. It's just not right. Okay, and that is it's an awful thing, right? Especially for those of us who do believe that people are inherently good, right? Because it's a contradiction to that at some level. But the piece that I think I would say, both from a faith tradition but also through the science of it, is that my continuing to hold a lack of forgiveness for that person, even when they are unable to forgive, is actually harming me because they are unable to forgive. And that's what I would say about that, because that's who the cost of that.
So I have a couple of things I want to say kind of in summary. So, excuse me, first of all, I didn't know that about you, Drew. You got a past. I mean, I just know Drew the accountant who sings pretty good. And I will say publicly, who's got a genuinely spiritual nature, and I appreciate that about him, about you. Any other questions or comments?
I have one.
Yes. Take the mic, please.
More or less.
Because we have at least one person streaming. We know that. So please take the mic.
I'll try and make it kind of quick, because if we're getting onto this. But I had actually an experience probably about a month ago in the oddest of places, where I believe this subject matter is something that I thought about while I was getting my teeth cleaned. It was just a weird situation, and I've been in it before in other ways. But the hygienist had an accent, but I didn't want to ask her where she's from. I think sometimes, depending on the personal history of an individual, they don't necessarily want to be called out for certain things, and maybe an accent would be one of those. So in between her work, we were talking. She was pretty chatty, and she told me she was from Poland. And almost immediately, I wanted to leave the chair and not continue with her services, because my parents were Polish, their families were all persecuted and killed in the Holocaust, and I have a lot of still have feeling about finding that spot in my being to forgive what happened. And I immediately felt that I didn't want to continue with her because of the history that she had and possibly participated in. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm trying to make it make sense. But we continued conversation, and I told her, well, my parents were Polish. So then we had a nice conversation about Poland, pierogies, things that were pretty much non-sensitive. And at some point I told her, well, you know, my parents were Jewish. I'm Jewish. And that's one thing that I do not find myself saying openly to a lot of people that I don't know, especially a Polish woman. She then, and I'll end this pretty soon, but she left me in a place where I said to myself, oh, I said it. What's going to happen now? And she then told me that her father had saved Jews during the persecutions, during the Holocaust. And that possibly he may have had Jewish roots, but she wasn't sure. But she was proud of the fact that he saved people. And I was like, okay, I take it back in my head. I didn't see that coming. And then we continued cleaning and conversation. And it was just a very perplexing place to be in within my being, because I feel like forgiving what has happened and the trauma that ensued with my generation. I say I forgive them many times, but I don't know if I really do. It's an ongoing question that I have. And I'll end this with, my mom died recently, bless her heart, and she left me with a book totally written in Hebrew, each page translated in Yiddish, in Polish, about her city. And it's a pretty big book, but I have a feeling that it talks about the deportation, the life, and what the author's experiences were in this particular city. And my hygienist would like to interpret the book for me.
That's nice. You mean translate, right? You mean
Yeah.
translate, right? Yeah.
Just really quick, though, I just wanted to mention what you've just described is honestly one of the first steps of forgiveness is humanization.
Yeah.
You know, you went to that place of fear and the narrative and all of that you are very familiar with and you know, and then that conversation changed and, you know, turned into humanization, which is one of the first steps of forgiveness. So thank you.
So I want to conclude with one phrase and two words, apropos of the onset of the high holidays. The first, getting back to the discussion about kindness and mercy, kindness and justice, chesed and tzedek, you know that one of the great metaphors for the high holy days is the phrase Avinu Malkeinu. Now, you know, in our day where we have a little bit of concern about the masculinity of those terms, I'm not going to get into that argument now. We can do that at another time after the Israel class. Avinu means our father, and Malkeinu means our king or our ruler. And we use this phrase to go, our father, our king, we have sinned before you. Our father, our king, we have done this and this and this. And we're going to sing this song tonight for the first time leading into the high holidays. But it's interesting that whoever created this metaphor, I think rather ingeniously captured two elements of our attitude toward God, and then simultaneously our attitude, I would say, toward this kind of topic that we're talking about. And note that the first metaphor is father, the person from whom we expect kindness, we expect a softness. Malkeinu is the one from whom we expect, our king is the one from whom we expect justice. And that song, Avinu Malkeinu, is the wish that both of those attributes get married to each other to produce a better world, a more perfect world. That's one. Second, I just want to remind you that the Hebrew word for repentance is tshuva, which in its primary meaning in modern Hebrew is answer, but it also means to return. There's this notion that, you know, that after Yom Kippur is over, Ne'ilah, the last service is over, and you know you're kind of purified. And we're going to walk this back in a second. You're kind of purified. You walk out the door, and already it's schmutzadik. It's already dirty out there. You know, you're already beginning to recede from that closeness that, if you've done your job right, you experience doing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Finally, Yom Kippur means the day of Okay, you got it, okay. Now, I don't know exactly when it originated, but I have it in my mind that some 16th, 15th century, 14th century Englishman, probably a man, but some English person, wanted to figure out a way to articulate this sense of being touched by the divine in a really wonderful way. And what he or she did was took the word at, the word one, and the word meant, and squished it together to make the word atonement, at one meant. And that's what the goal of that day is, from starting with Rosh Hashanah and ending with the Elah. You leave with the feeling, a sense of at one with God, at one with your community, at one with your family, at one with yourself. And we did a little bit of that work this evening. And thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Very much. So we shall have a cookie. Somebody tell me what time it is. So we just 8:30. All right, we'll take 15. So it's actually a bit later. Let's do this real quickly because I want to get to the service and I don't want to keep you here till 10 o'clock. All right, a cookie, a word, and then we'll come back real quick. All right. Say again. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anybody got a smartphone? Want to take a photo of the three of us and then send it to me or to all three of us? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Thank you. This was very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My wife is taking a picture too. All right, thanks. All right, so we'll get, so we'll just, I'll send it off to you. Send it off. No, I know. Yeah, you got Shabbos tomorrow. No, thank you very much. But I hope we can keep in touch. I really love to continue this conversation. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be at it. Sure. You take the wine cup? You take the... Folks, can we join up here, come into a semicircle? That was pretty good. Who has the other shofar? Bats, could you light the candles, please? So those that are holding the candles, please do your best to see they don't drip onto the floor. We lost a few folks, but we're still here. Nice to see everybody. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Borei Puri Hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen borei pri hagafen amen la 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 ya la 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 la. Borei minei v'samim, and then you shake. Who's got the? You pass it and shake it, pass it around. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. La 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 la. Borei me'orei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Borei me'orei ha'esh. Borei me'orei ha'esh. La 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 la. La 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lecho ben or lechoshech. Ben Yisrael ha'amim, ben Yom HaShvi, l'sheshet yemei ha'ma'aseh, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'mavdil ben kodesh lecho, la 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 la, la 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 la, ya la 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 l'chaim, la 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 la. Now quick as a running. Dunk it in there. Real quick. Eliyahu hanavi, Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu hagiladi, bimheira v'yameinu. Yavo Eleinu, Im Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov. So let's gather up our stuff. Please sit right up front here. The service isn't very long, and it's got these wonderful parts. And we're going to be accompanied by Drew's voice. Now is the time for turning. The leaves are beginning to turn from green to red to orange, even in California. The birds will soon begin to turn and head once more toward the south. The animals will turn to storing their food for the winter. For leaves, birds, and animals, turning comes instinctively. But for us, turning does not come so easily. It takes an act of will for us to make a turn. It means breaking with old habits. It means admitting that we have done wrong. It admits, and this is never easy. It means losing face. It means starting all over again. And this is always painful. It means saying, I'm sorry. It means recognizing that we have the ability to change, that these things are terribly hard to do. Unless we turn, we will be trapped forever in yesterday's ways. God, help us turn from callousness to sensitivity, from hostility to love, from pettiness to purpose, from envy to contentment, from carelessness to discipline, from fear to faith. Turn us around, God, and bring us back toward you. Revive our lives as in the beginning, and turn us toward each other, Adonai. For in isolation there is no life.
Amen.
Let's pick up on page 2 in the middle. As we listen to the sound of the shofar, may its meaning enter into our hearts and shape our actions in the days of old. Read. May the sound of the shofar. May the sound of the shofar penetrate our souls and cause us to turn back to our God.
May the sound of the shofar break the bonds of evil, falseness, and enable us to serve God with a whole heart.
May the sound of the shofar renew our loyalty to the one God and strengthen our determination to defy the false gods which threaten our days.
May the sound of the shofar awaken us to our many failings and to the vastness of God's mercy to those who truly repent.
Together, may the sound of the shofar enter our hearts, for blessed is the people that hearkens to its call. I haven't had such good luck lately. Let's see what I can do. Somebody say tekiah.
Tekiah!
Drew?
Join with me if you would like.
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Page 4. I'm going to try this song. It's sung usually on Shabbat morning. It's also I think it's also in the daily service as well. Guardian of Israel, guard the remnant of Israel, so those of Israel who say Shema Yisrael will never perish. Guardian of our united people, guard the remnant of your nation, so the one people says Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, that people will never perish. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo She'eret Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo She'eret Yisrael. V'al Yovad Yisrael, Yal Yovad al yovad Yisrael haomrim Shema Yisrael shomer goy echad Shemor she'erit am echad shomer goy echad Shemor she'erit am echad V'al yovad goy echad V'al yovad goy echad hamiyachadim shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Page 5. Al chet shechatanu. I'll read the Hebrew, and if you could respond in the English. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'ones u'viratzon. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'zadon u'vishgaga.
For the sin we have committed against you consciously or unconsciously.
V'al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'galui u'v'sater.
Sin we have committed against you openly or secretly.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'sinat chinam.
For the sin which we have committed against you by hating without cause.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'masar v'matan.
For the sin we have committed against you in business.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'hona'at le'ah.
For the sin we have committed against you during
Top of page 6. Drew?
Ve'al kulam Eloha Selichot Slach lanu Mechal lanu Kapel lanu.
We have sinned against life by failing to work for peace.
We have sinned against life by keeping silent in the face of injustice.
We have sinned against life by ignoring those who suffer in distant lands.
We have sinned against life by forgetting the poor in our midst.
We have failed to respect the image of God in every human being.
We have withheld our love from those who depend on us.
We have engaged in gossip and slander.
We have distorted the truth for our own advantage.
We have conformed to fashion and not to conscience.
We have indulged in despair and trafficked with cynics.
We have given little support to our house of study.
We have neglected our heritage of learning.
We have sinned against ourselves and paid scant heed to the life of the Spirit.
We have sinned against ourselves and have not risen to fulfill the best in us.
Ve'al kulam Eloha Selichot Slach lanu Machal lanu Kapel lanu.
So this prayer in the middle of page 7 came to my mind during our discussion. This is an acrostic, which means it starts with Aleph, goes to Bet, goes to Gimel, and acrostic so it goes through the whole Hebrew alphabet. And we start off by saying, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, we have sinned, we have done all kinds of terrible offenses. And I remember going all the way back, I must have been 8 years old in Hebrew school, where the teacher said, we take these on, she probably didn't reference this prayer directly, but she said we talk about these things in a collective by which we take not only responsibility for ourselves, but for the entirety of the community. Now, I haven't practiced this, I'm embarrassed to say, but let's see if we can do this through the melody that I've heard over the years. If you would, please rise. This is the one where if you wanted to, you beat your chest. I've never been... Ya la 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 ya la 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 Hashamnu Bagadnu Gazalnu Dibarnu Dofi ya la 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 ya la 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 Evinu Hirsha'anu Zadnu, Chamasnu, Tafalnu, Shaker, Ya la la, ya la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, Ya Atznu Ra, Kizavnu, Latznu, Maradnu, Niatznu, Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Saranu Avinu Pasha'anu Saranu Kishinu Oref. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Rasha'anu Shichatnu Ti'avnu Ta'inu Ti'ata'anu. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. We have all committed offenses. Together we confess these human sins.
The sins of arrogance, bigotry, and cynicism, of deceit and egotism, flattery and greed, injustice and jealousy.
Some of us have kept grudges. We were lustful, malicious, or narrow-minded.
Others were obstinate or possessive, quarrelsome, rancorous, or selfish.
There was violence, weakness of will, xenophobia.
We yielded to temptation, showed zeal for our bad causes.
Quick story, please be seated. You see that the translators tried to follow the alphabetical system of the original Hebrew. So my first year rabbinical school, we took a course in Hebrew literature, Jewish liturgy, with that guy's name will come to my head real quick. And he was part of the process, and he said, you know, Larry Hoffman, thank you, Larry Hoffman. He said, you know, when it came to X, they had a real problem. The best they could come up with was xenophobia, but there you have it. There you have it. Let's pause now. I'm going to invite the people I asked to take a Torah. Please come forward. There should be 6 of you. All right. Okay, so we have the 3 covers over there. Lynn, will you come up and come? And I don't know your name. Can you come up and open the ark? Ha ha! You don't get a roll. Ha ha! but Susan gets a special roll shortly. You're needed to open the ark, but before you wait till your partner comes, so you both open the ark together. Now's a good time to open the ark. Okay. Hagel's over yonder. So the symbolism is pretty clear. We're taking off the colored covers and putting on white covers. You got it?
I got it.
Look. This is actually fairly light. You got it?
Yeah, you want me to take the heavy one?
No. Actually, this is not too heavy either. Here you go, Larry. Okay, so I told you whom you're partnered with, right? So, yeah. Okay, so that goes with that one. And I think these 2 covers are the same size. So you could all sit down. Either uncover or can take off the cover and put on the new one.
You want to do this one?
No, sit there, right there, sit like that. Yeah, because my first night of service.
What's your partner?
Yeah, there's 2 longer ones.
Yeah, I want a longer one.
That one goes.
We're going to take this one off. I'm going to put a white cover on.
That's the best we got.
No.
It's basically a swaddling cloth that they make into the Torah lines.
Just stay put. Hold on.
Is this for the new year?
yours to the ark when you're done. There's no prayer, there's no song. It's just, we were colorful and now we're pure. Just lay that down there. No.
So I will tell you two stories. For 12 years or so, Greg and I worked at the Magnus Museum of Docents.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that the Magnus has in its possession is the ark that was on the Queen Mary.
Oh, really?
One of the docents looked at the ark and for the first time said, I was on that ship. I was on that boat. Went back to
Uh-huh. The Queen Mary. Okay, Susan, no, hold on. I think we all want to, and Bert, I don't want to leave you alone. Could you come up and join us on the Bima too, please? But why we...
And not every synagogue has a
right,
retaining court like that.
right.
But that ark did because it was on the boat.
Huh. Oh, yeah, man. So Susan, you got to come over here. The reason I asked Susan to join us, Betsy, is you're going to Paris tomorrow?
Yes, I am.
How long are you going for?
18 days.
18 days. May it be your will. I'll read a bit of the Hebrew. Hi ratzon milefanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu shetolichenu l'shalom v'tatzidenu l'shalom v'tadrichenu l'shalom v'chasmachenu l'shalom v'tagienu limchoz chetzfanu l'chaim u'lesimcha u'l'shalom. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our fathers and mothers, that you should lead us in peace and our steps in peace, direct our steps in peace, guide us in peace, support us in peace, and cause us to reach our destination in life, joy and peace, and return us in peace. And this is an older blessing. I'm always tempted to kind of edit it out, but it's such an example of the way someone would say this prayer in the Middle Ages, when it wasn't entirely clear you were going to reach your destination. Save us from every enemy and ambush, from robbers and wild beasts on the trip, and from all kinds of punishments that rage and come into the world. May none of this ever be part of your journey. May you confer blessing upon the work of our hands. Grant me grace, kindness, and mercy in your eyes and in the eyes of all who see us, and bestow upon us abundant kindness, and hearken to the voice of our prayer. For you hear the prayer of all. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who hearkens to prayer. Have a Nisiyat Tovah. And since you're going for Yontif, right? I am. So it should also be very meaningful. Yes. And yea, verily, those who opened the ark, would you please close it? And yea, verily, would you all return us to thy seats? I'm in a medieval mood all of a sudden.
There are coyote sightings and there could be wild
Wow, yeah.
so it's still appropriate.
In the middle of page 9, we have a few more songs and a couple more prayers. I have often made it my practice to look at the congregation one by one and to ask myself whether indeed my acceptance of the commandment to love my fellow was genuine. With God's help, I often found such to be the case. If I noticed anyone who had done me some wrong, I made it my rule to love them nevertheless, and I forgave them at that very instant. But if my heart refused to allow me to love them, then I would force myself to say good things concerning them until I had removed all rancor from my heart. This comes from the 18th century. Wow. Let's read this piece at the top of page 10 from Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. Sure. Lo, as the potter molds his clay, shaping and forming it from day to day. Thus in your hand, Adonai, are we, you whose mercies never pass away. Even as the mason hews the stone, and one is carved and wrought and shattered one. Thus in your hand, Adonai, are we, you who of life and death are God alone. Lo, as amidst the fiery glow, the smith his iron forges blow on blow. Thus in your hand, Adonai, are we, you who saves those who care laid low, by care laid low. Lo, as the silver 7 times tried, is in the smelter's furnace purified. Thus in your hand, Adonai, are we, you who balm and healing scatter wide. There is a grace that every dawn renews, a loveliness making every morning fresh. We will endure, we will prevail. We, the children of the one who crowds the heaven with stars, endows the earth with glory, and fills the mind with wonder. That's page 12. I'm reading this, I don't know that you know the name Chaim Stern, but he was a pretty important Reform rabbi. He's been gone for some time. He was the rabbi of Westchester Reform Synagogue and was a pretty good liturgist. He wrote a number of things that contributed to different Reform prayer books. Number 14, page 14. This is a prayer that you find at the end of the Amidah. God, keep my tongue from evil and my lips from deceitful speech. Let me know the way I should go, for to you do I lift up my soul. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. But how can I see all my own failings? Rid me of my faults that are hidden. Lead me to your truth and teach me. You are God, my helper. For you do I wait all this day. Open my heart to your teaching, and I will make haste to do your commandments. Yehiyu liratzon imrefi, vehegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri vego ali. Page 16. I have my initials next to that, but would you 16, page 16. You get it started, please rise.
Join with me, please. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu ve'anenu, ki ein banu ma'asim, aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed, aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed, ve'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu ve'anenu, ki ein banu ma'asim, aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed, aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed, ve'hoshienu.
And we'll conclude with Oseh Shalom at the back of the page. May the one who makes peace in the highest of places make peace for us, for all Israel, for all the world, and together we say Amen. Oseh Shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru Amen. Oseh Shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru Amen. Shavua Tov, Shana Tova. Nisiat Tova, have a good trip, easy trip. It's a long way to Paris from here.
Long way to Tipperary.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Drew. Thank you all for coming.
Pleasure.